Outside the place of worship, as we got into my red bus, we introduced ourselves to each other. The couple were Mr. and Mrs. Overgate. The man with the red hair was Mr. Jeremy Harkin. It was, to say the least, a strange introduction, as it was much like a roll call on a school bus. It was the roll call of the last survivors of the dead city. We found a restaurant, and surprisingly, maybe not considering his excessive talk of his stomach, Mr. Harkin was able to cook out a delicious meal. It, I can say with all honesty, was the best meal I had had for a long time. But he was still less than happy with it when it was all over. I think he could have sat there and eaten for days on end. Maybe this was his way of coping with this disaster. It is strange, as we all showed different signs, he with his couldn't-care-less approach, the married couple with their optimisms, and Jenny and I insular. We decided to get some sleep. We pulled away the tables from the restaurant floor and slept there, with a view of the blue night sky reflecting on the big front windows of the restaurant. It's strange how many things we have done which we wouldn't have if not for this, said Jenny. I suppose so, I said reluctantly. Yeah, but is there much point to it all, lassie? I mean, I'd much rather be sitting in my favourite chair with a fag watching the footy than sleeping on this rat-infested floor. And with that conversation drawing to a discreet close, silence once again ensued, and sleep beckoned. When we awoke the next morning to the screams of Mrs. Overgate, she was clenching her stomach wildly. We rushed to the bus with the exception of Mr. Harkin, who strolled there complaining about not having any breakfast. I drove to the nearest hospital, which wasn't easy to find, as I had destroyed the last one we came to. There was definitely no going back there. Inside, Mr. Overgate and Jenny rushed, with Mrs. Overgate still in pain, to some maternity wing or other. I had to chaperone Mr. Harkin, who was already looking at signs of the restaurant. You'd think they'd have food near the entrance. It's a hospital, Mr. Harkin. Yeah, I know what it is, Sonny. I'm not senile. Whenever I came in for something, I'd always go for a bit to eat. They always keep you waiting. My stomach doesn't like waiting, see, so I have something to eat. And I've found you can tell from the food how good a hospital is. So I'll be able to see the chance of that lady. Mind you, I think she's gone already. I mean, having a baby and all this happening too. If she starts bleeding, there's nobody stopping it. Now, which way for breakfast? Left or right? I left Mr. Harkin as he wandered off, my mouth wide open with surprise at what he had uttered. The very matter-of-fact way he talked about a fellow survivor. I found myself inside a corridor that led, according to the sign, to the intensive care unit. Inside, I was horrified with what I found. It was a room that in my whole life I had never seen the likes of. There must have been at least 15 beds lined up side by side on both sides of the wall. On each bed there lay a patient connected to a bleeping machine, cables, wires, and tubes everywhere. I walked the whole distance, and on my return I threw up onto my hand. They were dead, well, almost, machines keeping them alive. Some moved a little as I walked past them. Most only the noises of the ventilator was all that was heard as the machine pushed air in and out of the lungs. The faces of them too, their arms covered in scabs and blood and pus pouring out and drying on the floor. They had caught the disease, their condition leaving them vulnerable. When all hell broke out into the city, they were left and could run nowhere. Most could not even utter a word, unconscious. Maybe this was the better way to go. A few of them had already started to decompose, their bodies dehydrated to the point of death. I could not even imagine what they had gone through, just lying there, unable to move or do anything, but being kept alive, waiting to die. I started to look at the charts that were left at the end of the beds. Most were printouts, but on some were handwritten notes, which I presumed a doctor must have written. Afterwards, as they detailed in layman's terms what was wrong with each patient, one had a car crash, one a severe allergic reaction, the third patient, a Lloyd Driscoll, had jumped from a diving board into a swimming pool, and had been in a coma for 30 years. I looked at him, unable to even speak, his eyes just rolling up to the sky. On his chest lay a card. It was from his mother, maybe the last one, a message he probably could never understand. She had simply written that she loved him, missed him, but would see him soon. She had written almost as if for someone else, that she had thought he had tried to commit suicide, that when he dived he kept himself under the water and suffered a fit or stroke, that she was unable to switch his machine off for 30 years as she was his mother and loved him so. My eyes filled up with tears, and I reached over to the power button and switched him off. I began to switch them all off. This way their deaths would be quick. I got to one of the patients as I hovered over the button. He woke startled and started to shout, "No, don't switch me off, help me, help me." But he could not see his face was covered with lesions. His stomach was already opened and blood pouring to the ground. I pressed hard on the button and the lights on his unit went dim and off. For a few seconds he was still alive. "Bastard," he said, "you bastard." And then he died. I switched the rest of them off. There was some wailing, but it didn't last long. I turned off the ICU light and left the unit that now had become the hospital's last mortuary. I told Jenny of the incident and the rest. Harkin laughed and repeated the dying words of that man. "You bastard, you total bastard," he said, and laughed into his drink, spilling it down his cheeks. "You know, it's not the first time I've heard a story like that," Harkin continued. "Once someone told me that there was this plane that was hovering high above. It got a hole in it. The whole plane and cabin depressurized, and the passengers were starved of oxygen. As fate would have it, the plane descended, and oxygen started to enter the plane, although some say an object covered the initial hole, and the plane's oxygen kicked in. But they say the passengers recovered, well, vital signs anyway. But they were brain dead, all of them, sitting there, unable to move or speak, but conscious enough to know as the plane hit the ocean and the lungs filled full of water." "What is wrong with you?" I said to him. "Me, sonny, nothing. Just a story, nothing more. You don't want to believe it, don't. Just telling it, that's all." "I think I prefer you when your mouth's full," said Mrs. Overgate, who was feeling much better now. And then from behind us came a voice, a familiar voice, but I couldn't quite place it. It said, "What say you?"